Hello and welcome to Real Cheating Story. I turned away from the grave, tears pouring down my face. My best buddy put an arm around my shoulders and handed me his thankfully clean handkerchief. Whoever it was that said men didn't cry was entirely wrong in my case. I teared up at emotional stories, and now I was weeping for my loss. We've been married for nearly 40 years and best of friends. It was doubly hard because we had planned a very special 40th celebration, but I had to cancel it. It wasn't that I minded missing it. I minded missing it with her. Life goes on. I went back to work, lucky to have a part-time job I loved. I rattled around in the house a bit. It crossed my mind to sell it and move, but I was conscious of the received wisdom not to make changes too soon. Most of all, I was only in the house because the life insurance meant that the house was paid for with a substantial sum. Besides, I'd given away a tithe of it, 10%, something we'd always done. Some of it went to a charity we'd supported for years that is run by a good friend in a town quite a ways from us. It's a town center coffee shop for mothers and preschool children, deliberately in the bad end of town. It serves not only proper coffee, but also dirt cheap instant coffee, aimed at destitute mothers. You probably wouldn't believe some of the things our friend told us. Moms come in, and when she asks whether they'd like a drink, they refuse, as otherwise they wouldn't have enough money for food for their evening meal. In the winter, several of them come in as soon as the coffee shop opens and leave when it closes, so that they're not at home in the cold. Heating's too expensive. Why have I told you all this? Well, it explains what happened to me about 6 months later. I was driving home from the airport late after a long business trip. It was a bitter evening, and I had the heater turned right up. As I drove past a bus stop, I saw this dejected-looking figure hunched up on the seat with bags at their feet. I'm ashamed to say that I drove on. Well, you know what they say about picking up strangers, but things started bothering me. First, I realized that the figure I had seen must be frozen stiff, no coat. Then I realized that there were no more buses that evening. Then those coffee shop mothers flitted through my brain. I swore and turned around. What was the point in supporting my friend's charity, helping people in a town far away, if I wasn't prepared to put myself out for local people? As I drove back, I was turning over in my mind the best approach. I knew it would be kind of scary to be approached in the dark by a stranger. I drew up before the bus stop, figuring that it would be less intimidating if the car was a way off. As I walked towards the figure, I could see that my approach was causing a certain amount of tension, but the figure remained hunched up. The closer I got, I could see long dark hair. Not necessarily female, but likely. Excuse me. I stopped several feet away to try to reduce the tension. It's okay. I'll move on. The voice was weary, but female. I'm not trying to move you on, I explained. I'm offering help. She snorted. I don't need your kind of help. I was at a complete loss to understand what she meant. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to offend you, I stuttered, realizing how my offer could have been misinterpreted. I just wondered if you needed a lift, as there aren't any more buses tonight. I couldn't leave you out in the cold with no coat, I said, realizing I'd surprised her. Listen, I've got a blanket in the car. If I can't help you in any other way, at least let me give you that. You'd give me that? Of course I would. Then at least you'd have a chance to survive and look after your baby. She paused, a bit hesitant. What else would you do if I was prepared to accept your help? Well, I could take you somewhere to find shelter, or you could use one of my spare rooms, and I'd make a hot meal for you. She blinked at me, looking unsure. What are you, some sort of angel? No, just a lonely old man who lives in a big house and wants to help someone in need rather than just driving by. I can't believe you're for real, but I'm so screwed that I'm prepared to give it a chance. I was slightly taken aback by her language, but given her situation, I understood. She slowly got up, and I reached to steady her as she almost fell. Her arm was so cold, I thought she must be numb. Let's get you and the baby into the warm car, and he'll come back for your bags, I said, carefully helping her. She was numb with cold, and I nearly had to carry her to the car, settling her in the back with her baby. When I came back for her bags, she was shaking so badly that her teeth were chattering. As the heat warmed her, some of the numbness began to subside. Hold on, sweetheart, we'll be there in 10 minutes. I was appalled, wondering what had led to her trying to find shelter for the night at a bus stop. I was so glad that I'd stopped, worried that she might not have survived the night if I hadn't. When we got home, I carried her bags inside and turned on the lights and the fire in the sitting room. I went back to help her in. I settled her in front of the fire, finally getting my first proper look at her. She was pale, very pale from the cold, with spots of color on her cheeks from the heat of the car. Her hair was lank, and she had dark circles under her eyes. She looked incredibly vulnerable. It was obvious that she hadn't been able to wash for a few days. There were smudges of dirt on her face and hands, and her clothes were rumpled. But under all that, she was obviously a lovely young woman. Her fine bone structure and slim figure were evident, though too slim at the moment. She was incredibly petite. Suddenly, I understood why she had suspected me of having ulterior motives. I realized that with the way she had been treated by others, she probably hadn't received much kindness from anyone. I felt a deep sense of shame about how people had treated her. A steely determination built in my heart to help this overburdened soul reclaim her life. First, we saw to the baby's needs. I made a mental note of what she might need so I could buy it the next time I visited the store: 2 nappies, wipes, formula. I had to make a quick note of the brand she used. I thought for a moment about why she was using formula rather than breastfeeding, then realized my mistake. She couldn't feed the baby herself. She wasn't getting enough to eat or drink. She also had precious few clothes for the baby. I resolved to buy at least one item for the baby until I could convince her to come with me and choose what she needed. As I looked through her bags, I noticed that most of them contained things for the baby, with virtually nothing for herself. I didn't have much in the house, having been away, but I did have eggs and cheese. I went back into the sitting room to ask if that would be okay for her, and stopped short, my cheeks flaming. She had obviously fed the baby as much as she was able and used formula to supplement her meager supply. Clever girl, I thought to myself. I quietly went back to the kitchen and came back with an omelet and some toast. I always keep a spare loaf of bread in the freezer. She was in the process of changing the baby when I returned. "Can I heat some water for Angela's milk, please, mister?" I felt like a fool. I hadn't even introduced myself. I boiled the kettle for tea or coffee for us. "Tell me what to do while you eat this, and my name's James." "What's yours?" "Kate," she said. "Thank you." She held out her other hand, and I shook it. "Pleased to meet you, Kate. And Angela, too." She offered Angela's bottle with the other hand and asked me to fill it to the second line from the top. There was already the correct measure of formula powder in it. When I came back from the kitchen, she was tearing into the omelet, and I deduced that she hadn't eaten properly for some time. I was shaking the bottle and tried a bit of liquid on the inside of my wrist. It was still too hot. "Have you got children? Possibly grandchildren?" she asked when she saw my reaction. She immediately apologized and promised not to ask again. "It's okay. The bad memories are fading," I replied. The whole family were on one of the jets that hit the Twin Towers. What she said next shocked me to the core, and only later did I realize she was probably right. "Horrible, but I think it's better than what happened to me," she said. She saw my expression, but just continued to explain. "I started dating this lovely guy and invited my parents up to meet him. They were on the Pentagon jet. I didn't understand how that could be worse until she filled in what had happened after that. Her guy had been really sweet at first, eventually proposing and marrying her. But then, after they'd always used protection, somehow she became pregnant. Far from being sweet, he turned into a completely different person, telling her how much he didn't want children. As she continued her story, between mouthfuls, I noticed the milk was the right temperature and began feeding Angela. She thought he would come around when he saw the baby, but it seemed to make him worse. Then one day, when she was coming back from a visit to show Angela off to her work colleagues, she found that her key didn't work in the lock of her apartment. His phone said number unobtainable, so she called a locksmith. When he arrived, he told her it was a high-security lock and that he couldn't open it or cut her a key without written permission from the person who bought the lock. She couldn't understand it, so she went down a couple of blocks to find a room at a local hotel. That's when her world came tumbling down. They wouldn't accept her card. No funds, they said. It turned out he had cleaned her out of all her money, sold the apartment, and disappeared. She crashed with a work colleague for the first couple of nights, but babies and single colleagues you don't know very well just didn't mix, so she left. Her lovely husband had moved her away from the area she knew into the city, so she didn't know anyone else. James had found her on her third night. After the first horrendous night, when she couldn't quite believe she had survived intact. She learned to choose bus shelters in quieter districts. She was at her wit's end, with no money left, and waiting for her grandmother to return from a cruise in a couple of weeks. I muttered 2 words and shocked myself, bloody scumbag. It made Kate laugh, and she was even more beautiful when she laughed. I realized that when my parents died, they still loved me, and it wasn't their choice to leave. But when someone rejects you, chooses not to be with you, and takes you to the cleaners in the process, it hurts so much more. I know I'm probably better off without him, but it still hurts. Listen, while I feed Angela, why don't you go and shower and change into clean clothes? She blushed adorably. I really haven't got any. You came to here. You've got 3 choices. See what's in my wife's wardrobe, although it will all be too big. Use a t-shirt of mine, or use a bathrobe while your clothes are in the washing machine. I'd show you, but I think Angela might object. Just explore upstairs until you find what you need. Choose any room to make your own. I could see the tears pour down her face as she choked out, "Thank you," and quickly turned to hide them. "Won't your wife be upset?" she asked. "She died 6 months ago. I'm on my own." I could see the flush mounting up the back of her neck. "Don't worry, you weren't to know." Kate fled up the stairs, still crying, presumably unable to speak or take any more emotion. Angela grumbled as I stopped her sucking to burp her mid-feed. As I walked up and down, jiggling Angela, I wondered if there was anything I could do to get her parents' money back for her. It was too late now to do anything, but I filed a note to myself to ring a lawyer friend who might have some idea whether it was possible. After a few really satisfying burps, I settled down to give the rest of the bottle to Angela. She was sweet, with her little hands reaching for the bottle, and I felt my eyelids drooping after my long day and the emotion of Kate's story. James? Kate's voice penetrated my doze, and I felt her trying to take Angela from me. "I need to bathe Angela and get to bed," she said. I jerked awake. Sorry, of course. Opening my eyes was definitely a mistake. She had chosen one of my t-shirts, and even in that baggy garment that came down to her knees, she looked absolutely stunning. Her wet hair pulled back in a ponytail, and her legs and feet peeking out from the bottom of my shirt. I envied her. I let go of Angela. "Can you tell me where the washer is?" "Don't worry. You deal with Angela, and I'll put the clothes in the washer. I expect you'll want to add Angela's things to them as well." Actually, I had an ulterior motive. I needed to know her size so I could get her one more outfit when I went to buy baby clothes. "Oh, and while you're bathing her, I'll get the cot ready." A surprised look appeared on her face. "You came to here. It's actually really old for my child and my grandchildren." Surprisingly, it didn't hurt so much knowing it was going to be used again. A sort of adopted grandchild, perhaps. Kate's face was serious. "Thank you so much. It will be a privilege to use it." We went upstairs, and I grabbed a laundry basket from my room. Kate had started running a bath for Angela and put the bundle of clothes she'd left in the bathroom in the basket, adding Angela's clothes as she stripped them off. Downstairs, I wrote the sizes down on my list. I couldn't believe how small the dress size was and checked it twice. She really was petite. Shoes, damn. I slipped upstairs, hoping I had a few seconds to get the size before Angela was finished in the bath. A quick look in all the rooms, and I found a few things Kate had in one room. Fortunately, the shoe size was embossed on the sole. I was amazed at how small her feet were. To cover my need to peek at the shoes, I dragged the cot into the room Kate had chosen, then tapped on the open bathroom door. "Do you want the cot in your room or the one next door?" I know this sounds silly, but I want her near me. So many times in the last few days, I thought I would lose her. It would make me feel more comfortable. Kate replied, "I've already put it in your room with a clean cot sheet. What do you want to put over her?" "I don't have her sleep suit." "A quilt, if you have a spare." "Consider it done." I went and fetched a quilt and cover, adding a sleep suit to my list. Afterward, I went into my room to shower and change. It was now really late. When I came out, I went downstairs to get a drink and found Kate waiting for me. "I can't thank you enough." I held out my hand. "Please, it was nothing. I'm so glad to have you in the house. I really minded being on my own." She smiled at me and nodded. "Just so you know, if I'm not here in the morning, I need to go out shopping because there's no food in the house. Don't worry, and help yourself to whatever you need. I've got a spare key, which I'll leave out for you." The back door key is hanging by the back door if you want to go outside with Angela. Thank you. She threw her arms around me and gave me a huge hug. It warmed my heart. I woke briefly in the night hearing Angela whimper, and I figured Kate was feeding her. The whimpers didn't last long, so I drifted back off. In the morning, I was up late for me, but still before Kate. She'd obviously had precious little sleep over the last few days, not to mention the emotional trauma. I was glad for the shopping trip. It suddenly gave me a sense of purpose, and I was enjoying myself. I must have surprised the other shoppers when I laughed out loud for the joy of it. It was fun shopping for Kate and Angela. I realized again how petite Angela was when I had to buy children's clothes and shoes to fit her. I don't suppose what I bought was particularly suitable, but it would help until I could persuade Kate to let me buy something she chose. When I got back, Kate was feeding Angela again. In some ways, having a good sleep had made her look worse. She told me she felt exhausted, and I suggested she go back to bed if Angela would sleep. They did that, leaving me free to call Ken. Like me, Ken was appalled at what Kate's husband had done. He offered to get her a divorce for free and said he would have a word with a couple of people he knew who might also help. I was well satisfied with that. I knew the kind of contacts he had as a lawyer, and I was pretty sure he would get some answers. As I was musing on my newfound energy, I realized that I still had either 1 or 2 spare bedrooms, depending on whether Kate wanted Angela to sleep in a different room. I eventually wondered how I could find others to help. It gave me a new direction and a new busyness. I resolved to ask Kate later. When she came back downstairs, she looked worried. I've run out of formula and clothes. I'm so sorry. I don't have any more money. Please, would you let me have enough for that? Kate was almost in tears, obviously hating having to ask. Oh, I bought a few things for you when I went out for food this morning, but I forgot to tell you when I came back. They're over there. Kate thanked me profusely and walked over to the bags. These can't all be for me. She was incredulous when she realized what I had bought. She felt her knees on the floor and sobbed. I jumped up and went over, putting an arm around her shoulders. It's okay. It's not as if I can't afford it. I'm pleased to be able to help. It's given me a new purpose and cheered me up enormously. Kate gave me a watery smile and choked out, "Thank you so much," then turned and hugged me hard. We both fell over in a heap on the floor. "So I buy you a couple of things and you knock me over?" I laughed. I hadn't laughed so much in ages. "Seriously, you are very welcome." As we got up, she looked me in the eye. "It's so sweet of you, and they're all the right sizes too." "Thank you. One of the benefits of doing your washing," I grinned. "Later, when you're settled, we need to go out together so you can choose some more clothes for yourself. I'm not very good at women's styles." The next few days were interesting, to say the least. I felt like I had gained a daughter I never had and a new grandchild. Kate had a few ideas about who might need help. She was especially concerned about a young woman who had helped her on her first night fend off the countless men hitting on her. The woman had also advised Kate to go to a quieter neighborhood to avoid it all. Her name was Estelle, and during the long night, they had exchanged confidences. Estelle had an underlying honesty and compassion that made Kate warm to her. Estelle's parents had died when she was young, leaving her alone in the world. Kate's eyes filled with tears as she related the few things she knew about Estelle. Her parents had passed away when Estelle was much younger, and she had to fend for herself. She'd managed to stay clean and out of trouble until her 18th birthday, when her landlord had made advances, and she had to flee the building to escape. She managed to find a job with an older couple who ran a convenience store, where she rented a room above the store for a large part of her wages. The couple also protected her from the endless stream of men. Then the unthinkable happened. Estelle became sick and was bedridden, which turned out to be a stroke of luck because, during that time, the couple running the store were killed in a raid. Not only was Estelle devastated, but without a job or even the most basic means of survival. She eventually began working in a club. The money was good, and she was able to rent a tiny room, but when she refused to let a customer touch her, she was kicked out. "How do we find Estelle?" I asked. "The only place I know is where I met her. I don't know if she's still there, but we can sure try." That night, we both went with Angela safely wrapped up in the back. Estelle was nowhere to be found. Kate was despondent, fearing she had succumbed to the dangers on the streets. Then she saw an old man who had given her some good advice, at least enabling her to get some food and a hot drink. I stayed in the car, and after a bit of discussion, his face lit up. I know the girl. She's sweet. She always shared what she had with me and others. She said she was going to one of the suburban districts to try to find a friend with a baby. Kate came dancing back to the car, excited. "We got a lead." She told me what the man had said. "Here, take this." I handed her a large note. "Take your friend to the cafe over there, get him set up with a meal and a hot drink, and give him it." I watched them walk across to the cafe. There was some sort of an argument going on, but Kate obviously won. When she came back to the car, there were tears in her eyes. He wanted me to keep the money for my baby. I had a job persuading him I was okay. "Hey, we can come back and take him to the cafe again if you like." Kate looked shyly up at me. "I would like that. When you're down like I was, it means so much." She also had a hunch that Estelle would be in the bus shelter I'd found her in, or one very near. We didn't find her the first night, but on the second, she was there. Kate gave her quite a shock when she barreled into her arms, and another shock when she told her what she hoped would happen. Estelle was a little wary of me at first, understandably. Her life experience hadn't exactly allowed for men who didn't want to take advantage of her, despite her good experience with a couple who ran the convenience store. Where Kate was quiet, Estelle was a live wire. Not in a bad way, just full of energy and fun. She was also one tough individual, and I could see why she had survived the streets. I discovered that she was a bright girl too, a straight-A student up until she turned 18 when her life fell apart even more. The next evening I stopped wondering and called Ken. He was slightly incredulous at what I had done, but he made a suggestion that was so much better than my ideas that I jumped at it and invited him over, both to give Kate an update, not that she had an inkling of what he was doing, and to present his suggestion to Estelle. Kate and Estelle were excited that we were having a visitor, even if he was my best friend and far too old for them. They asked if they could cook and dispatch me to buy up the store for ingredients. I have to say, it was definitely worth it. The meal was fabulous. I had no doubt that Ken would get on well with the girls. He was such a sweetheart. I was concerned that the girls would find the company of two older men a bit dull, but they were in fine form. After we cleared up and made coffee, I said Ken and I had some things to discuss with them. They both sobered immediately. Predictably, Estelle voiced their fears. "That's it then," she said. "We need to manage on our own from now on." My face burned. No, nothing like that. I wouldn't do that." Surprisingly, Kate butted in. "No, you wouldn't." "I'm sorry, we thought that." I smiled at her. "Thank you. You're right. I wouldn't. This is much more exciting if you like the ideas. First, let's deal with Estelle. Ken, your idea." I handed over. After all, it was his idea. Ken explained to Estelle how his firm always took on an intern each year, many of whom were still with the firm. He offered Estelle the opportunity to do a long-term internship with the firm, paying her school fees so she could qualify. What her qualification would be would depend on both her work and study grades. Estelle rushed over to him, bounced onto his lap, and hugged him. "I can't believe you would do that for me." Thank you. Ken looked a little wary. "There are conditions. You've got to stay clean." Estelle's eyes sparked with determination. "And work hard, both at work and at college." "I'm sorry. I have to be practical," Ken said. Estelle was torn but could see that it wasn't really an insult. "Okay, sounds fair. I'll do it." "Great," Ken said. "You can work out the details later." We moved on to Kate and Angela. Kate looked apprehensive. "I don't think I can work with Angela so little." I smiled at her. "No need to work. Just listen to Ken." Ken looked serious. "I'd like to help you too, Kate. I've been trying to track down your ex-husband, but I need a bit more information from you. If you want a divorce, I can do that with the information you give me, but I'd really like a shot at getting back your money if you would allow me to." Kate's mouth dropped open. When she recovered a little, she tried to speak but stuttered. Eventually, she managed to get out a confused sentence. "You do that for me? I don't have any money, and I wouldn't want to spend my grandparents' money on that." Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. No money. Just a sense of justice," Ken assured her. "I can't even guess how much you lost or how much you might want returned, but I think I'd like you to try. After what I've been through, trying to keep Angela safe." Kate's voice cracked, and she swallowed to regain her composure. She went on in a whisper, He was such a horrible person to do that to a baby. Her cheeks reddened with embarrassment. Ken chuckled. Don't worry, I think I know a couple of people who can make him pay. Kate smiled. Thank you so much. She started to relate what she had lost. It turned out they had bought the flat with her parents' money raised from the house sale and their savings. The remainder was in the savings account her ex-husband had emptied. When Ken found out the sale value of the flat and added it to the savings, it totaled well over $500,000. She had planned on using the savings to trade the flat for a place with a garden for Angela, with some leftover to start a college fund for her. That made Ken and me hopping mad. Ken just grinned and slapped me on the back. That just confirmed for me that my vision of making him pay is exactly right. When I asked, he just said, "You don't want to know?" And actually, neither did I. At breakfast the next day, the girls were ecstatic. They were talking nonstop and kept saying they didn't know how to thank Ken or me. Eventually, I managed to divert their thoughts to the day ahead, and we agreed to mount an expedition to take them to lunch and visit the shops for work clothes for Estelle and some outfits for Kate and Angela. Neither of the girls were happy about taking my money, but they could both see the sense in what I was saying. Kate earnestly and rather sweetly promised to pay me back when she was able to contact her grandmother. I discovered the old guy's name was Bert, and it was fun buying things for the girls. It was a constant struggle to stop them from buying things just because they were cheap. I resorted to a few of my management techniques to get them to say what they would buy if it wasn't my money, and we ended up with a fair compromise and some good clothes for all three. We also managed to set up a deal with the cafe, where Bert would keep the street outside the cafe clean in return for hot food and drinks. We were well satisfied with our trip. Over the next week, Estelle started work with Ken. She had a few hiccups, mostly due to a lack of confidence after all she had been through, but the combination of Kate and I turned out to be brilliant at bolstering her. Both the girls were excellent cooks, and we took turns, which broadened our horizons. We learned new things about each other and about food. I started thinking about exercise because it was obvious that my waist was increasing. Saturday came, and we breathed a sigh of relief to have a weekend to slow up and take stock. After lunch, the girls were out back relaxing and playing with Angela before her nap. I was out front mowing the grass and tidying up. That's when my life turned upside down. I had just shut off the mower and emptied the grass box for the last time when a car pulled up. I looked up as it stopped right outside our house. Funny that I already thought of it as our house. Out of the driver's seat stepped a stunning petite brunette. I'm sure my eyes must have widened, but she was too polite to comment. Or perhaps she was just used to it. Then I noticed the resemblance to Kate. But surely, she was far too young to be Kate's grandmother. More like her mom's age. So it must be an aunt. I held out my hand. You must be related to Kate. Pleased to meet you. Hello, yes, I'm Kate's grandmother, she said. I must have looked startled because she smiled and continued. Thank you so much for taking her in. I can't believe what she's been through, and am devastated to have been out of contact when she needed me so badly. I came as soon as I got her message. I didn't know she left a message. I'm James, I stammered, feeling completely tongue-tied. I must have been beet red. I felt like I was attempting to ask my first girl to dance. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. How I managed to make enough sense to offer her the facilities and show her through the house. Out to the back, I don't know. There was a touching reunion in the garden, with them all talking a mile a minute while I dispensed drinks and worked out what was happening to me. I needed that space. Finally, I realized that I was attracted to her and immediately felt guilty. Guilty because of Kate, guilty because she was Kate's grandmother, guilty for thinking about someone who seemed so young in that way. Just guilty. God, I needed to sort my head out. I looked up to find them all staring at me. I glanced down and around, trying to figure out why. Nothing. I held out my hands, palm up. What? We were just trying to involve you in a discussion about dinner. Estelle laughed. You were miles away. I was just thankful I hadn't given myself away by muttering. We were hoping you'd take me to the shops to buy things, and we three will cook. That way, Kate and Liz can talk while we're shopping. Great, I said. Why don't we take Angela with us too? And you'll stay, won't you, Liz? Kate smiled gratefully at me, and Estelle threw herself into my arms and gave me a quick hug. She whispered in my ear, I knew you'd say the right thing, you lovely man. Then, in a quiet, sing-song voice, she added, and you like her. I could feel myself blushing. I suppose I hung on to spare my blushes, but when Kate raised one eyebrow and Liz grinned, my ruse failed. I went beet red and let Estelle go. I realized one thing, though. Estelle was right, but I hadn't come to terms with it yet. The cooking was fun. The eating was fun. Somehow, there was music, and Estelle and Kate were dancing. Liz wasn't far behind, and I was enjoying watching them. Well, mainly Liz, if I'm honest. If I hadn't kept my mouth shut, I'm sure I would have been staring at her. Her jeans seemed to be perfectly fitted, and she was slim, tanned, with auburn hair that shimmered in the light. I couldn't have told you what color her eyes were, perhaps green, maybe blue, and the graceful movements of the dance showed off her figure in a way that made me feel self-conscious. Looking good for a woman of her age. Hell, she looked spectacular for a woman half her age. In short, I was out of my league. Suddenly, Estelle swept over to me and yanked me out of my chair. We danced as a group, or rather, they danced and I wriggled until the end of the song. As it ended, Estelle moved toward Kate and took her hands. They started dancing together, and I realized she had known that the next song would be a slow one. She'd set me up. Was I pleased? Yes. Embarrassed? Certainly. Was I going to pass up this opportunity? Well, if I'd been the teenager, I felt like yes. But I was ancient, which gives you a bit more gravitas. So, was I going to pass up this opportunity? No. I took Liz in my arms. She rested her shiny curls on my chest and sighed contentedly. I thought, God, I can't believe I'm doing this. Liz's head came up, her eyes twinkling at me. Well, I'm enjoying it, she said with a smile. I blushed again, just like being a teenager. I couldn't believe I said that out loud, but her laugh was infectious. This time, I was able to speak. You're so out of my league, but I wasn't going to pass up a chance like this. As I looked down at her, I was struck anew by her appearance. God, you are so beautiful. Without thinking, I leaned in, but to my surprise, she reached up and placed a gentle hand on my cheek, guiding my head closer. We shared a brief, tender moment, and as we pulled away, we both took a breath, our hearts racing slightly. Liz rested her head back on my chest, and we swayed, caught in the moment until the song ended. I was reluctant to let go, but Estelle gently took his hand and led her back to the sofa. Anyone for a drink? I asked, my voice a little hoarse, trying to redirect my thoughts. It was a little corny, but it gave me something to focus on until I could talk to Liz alone. The next day was Sunday, so church was on the agenda. Liz came down to breakfast dressed for church, and I figured she might go. I realized then that they were a Christian family, when Kate also said she was coming with Angela. Estelle, surprisingly, had never been, but was open to trying it. So, we all set off together after breakfast. After the service, Ken came over to speak with Kate. He mentioned he was expecting an update midweek, so I invited him over for dinner on Wednesday. Afterward, some of the younger people spoke to Estelle and Kate, which was encouraging. They needed friends closer to their own age. Liz, as I expected, was a lively presence and quickly gathered an admiring group of men. She rolled her eyes at me at one point, and I felt strangely special. I had to talk to her more, though, so after lunch, when Estelle and Kate were invited by some of the younger group to go for a walk, I got my chance. The group passed our house, and the girls were picked up, with Angela being passed around and admired by everyone. I had given Kate a small rucksack of mine to carry Angela's things in. Nervous, I made us coffee, realizing it was just something to do with my hands, a way to distract myself. Liz patted the seat next to her, and thankfully, I sat down, the decision taken away from me. I still think you're out of my league, I said, feeling a little awkward. I've got nothing to offer you, and I don't understand why you let me kiss you. You could have a much younger man. I felt upset with how blunt I'd been. Liz's hand came up to stroke my cheek, and I didn't flinch, though it was unexpected. You silly man, she said with a grin that softened the sting of her words. With what you did for Kate and Angela, I was already predisposed to like you before I even met you. When I did meet you, I could see from your behavior. She laughed. That you were a little smitten. I grinned back, feeling like a teenager again, completely tongue-tied and awkward. She leaned over and brushed my cheek with a soft kiss, and I saw from my expression that I was still confused. I guess it's because your wife passed away recently, she said gently, and that's endearing too. We held hands, and because I was still trying to make sense of everything, I paused. Liz looked at me with an inquisitive but encouraging expression. Go on, say what you're thinking. No secrets. I blushed slightly. She touched my arm, her gaze warm and supportive. I hesitated, then blurted out, well, because you're so amazing. Liz raised an eyebrow, and her expression reminded me of Kate, steadying me. There, I said, relieved. Liz then threw herself into my arms, narrowly avoiding spilling coffee over us, and kissed me with enthusiasm. She settled into my lap with her head on my shoulder, which felt wonderful to me. You lovely, lovely man, she said softly. No wonder I think I'm falling in love with you. I was stunned. I might have thought I was falling for her, but how could she possibly feel the same about me? Our conversation ranged over many topics as we got to know each other better, and it was punctuated by gentle, sweet moments of affection. She shared that she volunteered at her local shelter and fundraised for several charities. She had worked in marketing before, and her late husband had been an athletics coach. They met in a gym. She was still very passionate about fitness, which explained her excellent physical condition. Unfortunately, her husband had been killed in a tragic accident at a tournament when a javelin struck him in the chest. Her two children, one of whom was Kate's mom, were 12 and 15 at the time. I felt deeply moved by their loss, and for her as well. She was touched by my empathy, and we held on to each other for comfort. After a while, she whispered in my ear, I want to talk to you about something, she said, and I was taken aback by the seriousness in her voice. I was so focused on her words that I didn't quite know how to respond. Then she spoke again, lightening the moment with her humor. Is that a gun? Or are you just happy to see me? We both broke into laughter. It's funny how the right moment can turn something ordinary into something special. I'd love for you to be in my life, she said softly. But what about Kate? She pulled back a little, and her smile was warm, full of love and understanding. You can't see what I see in you, but you care so much about everyone around you. Yes, we need to talk about Kate. Or rather, I need to talk to her. I think she'll be happy for us, but it's still a little quick for her. She's always asked me why I haven't found anyone else. After her parents died, we became very close. I always told her I hadn't met the right man yet, and I wasn't going to settle for just anyone. John and I really loved each other, and I never thought I'd have another relationship after he passed. I was getting involved with my work and focused on helping others. It was a lonely time before Kate came, but having her and others like her filled that gap. But not the same way as I feel about you. I kissed her again. We just couldn't seem to get enough of each other. Ken called me on Tuesday to ask if he could bring a friend to dinner on Wednesday. There was never any doubt in my mind that I'd say yes, and Ken knew he could have just turned up with him. But he preferred to give me a heads up so I could be better prepared. The friend, Bronx, looked like a typical military man with a buzz cut and a fit physique. When I asked Ken about him later, I found out that Bronx was a former SAS officer. His current job was as a private investigator. Ken had brought him around, figuring it was better if Kate heard the news directly from him. Bronx had been tracking down Kate's ex-husband and had finally found him. I asked Bronx for his plan, and he shared a few ideas I hadn't considered. I had been planning on taking legal action, but Bronx's ideas were more unconventional. Ken explained, well, Miss Kate, he cleared his throat, aware that the term wasn't quite right. I mean, your ex-husband is doing very well. He's got a fancy house now and has set himself up in business as a venture capitalist. He must have had some money to begin with, because what he took from you wouldn't have been enough. He's buried himself in the city, but hasn't changed his name, probably because he thought it wouldn't matter. Bronx laughed sarcastically. How can you have done that so quickly? He must have started it when you were pregnant, he said. I'm sorry, Kate. Kate, now visibly angry, muttered under her breath, calling him all sorts of unflattering names. Estelle reached out to calm her down, holding her hand. I couldn't help but feel a little jealous of their bond. How much had changed for me in such a short time. Miss Kate, Bronx began, still using the formal address. I think I have a plan that might interest you. Kate looked up at him. Okay, go ahead. I looked into his business a bit, Bronx continued, and he's actually quite good at it, especially when it comes to technology or service industries. He has a knack for reading people and making smart investments. But he has a weakness. Liz squeezed Kate's hand tightly, and Estelle took her other hand in support. His weakness is films. He's good at reading the producers and can tell which projects will be successful. But if actresses are involved in the presentations with directors, he's a sucker for a pretty face. There was a collective sigh of disbelief from the group, and Kate muttered more angry words under her breath. He's made a couple of small mistakes with films and lost money, but it's been more than made up for by his other investments. I think he started dabbling in this side business when you became pregnant. He was doing it alongside his job, using his work travel to set up meetings and make deals. How did his previous work never notice? Ken asked. I don't know, Bronx replied, but he must have had plenty of free time on his travels, so he used it to his advantage. Ken looked at him. So we can't get him on that, can we? No, Bronx said, but here's what I propose. I think you'll like it. Kate raised an eyebrow. What's the plan? We set up a fake film company with a couple of model-type starlets and a producer. That's all we need. The rest of us will handle the behind-the-scenes work. We pitch a film that's much larger than his normal budget, something he'd normally hesitate to take on. But he'll want to be involved, and he'll bring in another investor, promising to double his investment. I don't understand, Kate said, confused. How are we going to find another investor? And how do we pay all these people? Ken grinned. Easy when you know how. Explain it to me, Kate said, still puzzled. What's the payoff? We're going to pitch for $2 million, Bronx said. The room went silent except for Ken, who had clearly already heard the number. $2 million? I asked. There was a collective gasp from all of us except Ken, who had obviously heard this already. He can't do that. His ceiling would normally be about $750,000, but we're going to push him up to $1 million. We're also going to sabotage a couple of his other deals, so he goes bankrupt when we take out our $1 million. Kate doubles her money, and he's ruined. Bronx was grinning like a Cheshire cat. How can you be sure it's going to work? Kate asked. I'm not honestly 100% sure at the moment, but by the time we go for it, I will be, or we don't move forward, and we have to get him another way. What do you think? Bronx asked. I think it's a good outcome, but you still haven't explained how, I said, admiring Liz's sharp comment and tenacity. Bronx looked impressed too, and Kim was outright grinning. I'm going to play the role of producer, Bronx explained. I've got a mate who owes me a favor and would play one of the roles. I had someone in mind for the other, but I've changed my mind. I found someone else I think could do the role, and might interest your ex. Bronx was looking straight at Estelle when he said it, and I suddenly realized where this was going. Before I could speak, he continued, your ex has a thing for blondes and Hispanics. That confirmed my suspicion and made Kate mutter under her breath again. You can't use Estelle, Kate said. She's been through so much, and I won't have her exposed like that. From my point of view, it's a flat-out no. Wait, we don't know what she'd have to do yet, Bronx said, trying to calm her down. Let's at least consider it before rejecting it. I like the idea of bringing down Kate's ex. I think Bronx was the most surprised out of all of us that Estelle had jumped in so positively. I had a sudden feeling that I knew where this was coming from, judging by the twinkle in Liz's eye. I could see she thought the same. So, what about the rest of us? Liz asked. There's quite a lot of background work to do to make it look real. We need documents, an office, well, at least the appearance of one, and phone lines and emails with several voices in it, and a bank account. That's where you all come in. The rest is up to me and my mate and Estelle, if she's willing. Estelle nodded without hesitation. Explain more about what I have to do. You'll be the second role. You've got a bubbly personality that will complement the main star, Bronx explained. My mate will handle the main stuff with him, and you'll be the backup, the one who will never actually get involved. I hesitated. Your mate is going to, don't worry about her, Bronx cut in. She's more than capable of standing up for herself. And being with him will be a walk in the park compared to where I rescued her from. Bronx's tone was cold, and I couldn't imagine the life his blonde friend must have led before he was rescued. Bronx seemed to notice my reaction and softened, his voice low. You have no idea. That was sobering. If this was what we had to do to bring down Kate's ex, I was starting to think it was a much more fitting form of revenge than anything I could do in a courtroom. Kate let out a small laugh. It's a great deal cheaper than going to law, she said, but her smile quickly faded. Who's going to fund this? I can't, and I don't think Gran has anything like $1 million. Kim was still smiling. I am. My firm is doing really well, and knowing Bronx, I'll only gain from it anyway. Kate looked puzzled. How can you gain from it when you're funding it? Bronx has a way of making evildoers pick up the tab, Ken said. It's never failed before, or I wouldn't even consider it. I think it was that statement that sealed the deal for everyone present. We had all stepped into a plan run by Bronx, one that felt like stepping into an alternate universe. By the following week, an RV was parked in the driveway, and the dining room was filled with electronics and computers, all being managed by a highly competent, very fit, and clearly ex-military individual named Sparks. Bronx had already outlined the script and suggested a production company name. The work involved was considerable, but it was surprisingly fun brainstorming ideas for scripts, names, and logos. Liz, after some thought, came up with the definitive name, Clean Sweep Productions. Sparks created the branding and website, which looked polished in no time. We all helped with content for the Clean Sweep website, and the script became a collaborative effort between Bronx and Liz, with some input from Sparks. It was interesting to see Sparks, typically bright and professional, become captivated by Angela, helping Kate with her whenever possible. When not involved in tasks, Sparks maintained a cheerful demeanor, but his face often hardened when he wasn't in action. Whenever Angela was near, though, his expression softened, gaining a wistful quality. I couldn't help but wonder what he had been through, and then I remembered what Bronx had said. You can't imagine. I felt both profoundly sorry and, at the same time, so grateful that Angela gave some comfort and hope during this time. Liz had had a heart-to-heart with Kate, and much to her surprise, Kate had just said, "Go for it, Gran. He's solid gold. I'm so glad you found him after all this time." So, Liz and I were a couple. I still couldn't believe my good fortune. That night, Liz and I were able to spend time together in my room for the first time. To say I was nervous would be a gross understatement. I was shaking. By contrast, Liz was full of excitement. As soon as the door shut behind us, she ran toward me and embraced me, laughing and kissing my face. The rush of affection banished my nerves, and I found myself holding her up, kissing her back with equal enthusiasm. Somehow, our clothes disappeared, and I paused, overwhelmed. "Oh God, you're so beautiful," I whispered. She had a trim, lightly tanned body, curves in all the right places, and a mischievous grin. Her cheeks were slightly flushed from nerves. She was unbelievably stunning. Liz laughed with pleasure. "You're not so bad yourself," she said, hugging me tightly. The feeling of her body against mine was indescribable. Seeing her face, so open and full of emotion, made my heart race until she collapsed onto my chest. "Marry me," I whispered. She jerked her head up, eyes wide. "Surely, you can't be serious." "I'm serious, but it's a two-way thing, and I'll wait as long as you need. And please don't call me Shirley," I teased. Her laughter exploded, and once it had subsided, she simply said one word, "Yes." I was ecstatic, hugging and kissing her, before we just cuddled and eventually fell asleep. When I woke next, it was light, and her green eyes were gazing into mine. "I love you," she announced. The memories of what had happened the night before came rushing back. "I adore you," I said, feeling like the luckiest person alive. A tear formed in her eye. "You were such a sweetie." Finally, we were ready. The background work had been completed, and we sent out the first round of funding request emails. Bronx and Sparks had given us instructions on how to operate the phones with the voice disguising software. We practiced sounding like an LA-based production company and an uptight investor company. Ken's investment company would also be run out of our dining room for the time being. Once Bronx and Sparks were satisfied that we were sufficiently competent and unlikely to mess up, Bronx declared us ready to launch. Bronx went off with Sparks and Estelle to get the outfits they needed, leaving us to send out the second round of funding request emails. We were doing this properly so that Kate's ex wouldn't suspect our involvement. A large part of our role in the office was to turn down offers that weren't from the ex, ensuring the operation ran smoothly and convincingly. A few hours later, an expensive white convertible pulled up. Out stepped a suited guy with long hair and two drop-dead gorgeous women. They all wore oversized sunglasses. We couldn't understand what they were doing here, so we had a quick discussion and decided Bronx might have sent them. Just to play along, I went to the door and said, "Come in, please. I'm James." I led them through to the great room and introduced them to everyone. They didn't say much, but one of the women took off her sunglasses. Kate suddenly squealed and threw herself into her arms. "Estelle, I can't believe it's you," she said. It turned out it was indeed Estelle, so the other two must have been Sparks and Bronx, who had changed their appearances for the occasion. Bronx, laughing, pulled off his wig. "Looks like we got the clothes and accessories right. Do you think your ex will fall for it?" "You bet," Kate replied, giving Sparks a hug. Sparks looked a little surprised, but I could see the slight lift of her mouth in response. What surprised me was that Kate didn't let go of Sparks' hand, and Sparks didn't pull away either. I glanced at Liz, who had a slightly furrowed brow, and resolved to discuss it with her later. When the excitement had calmed down, Liz asked, "So, what happens now?" "We wait and tickle," Bronx said with a laconic smile. "What does tickle mean?" Liz asked. "Tickle means making ourselves known in a few places where the ex is likely to hear about us and our film plans. It's also about writing an abstract of the script and sending it to a few people who know him, but not directly to him." "Why not him?" Liz asked. "Because we want him to want it," Bronx explained. "If we try to shove it down his throat, he'll bail when things get difficult." Kate was on edge the whole time the three of them were out on the first trip. I asked if there was anything I could do, but she just said she was nervous and wanted to hear what happened when they came back. It felt like a failure when they returned without seeing the ex at all. But Bronx was optimistic. "It wasn't wasted," he said. "He'll hear about us from the people we met. We also know that he'll be there the day after tomorrow, so we know we'll meet him then." "Sparks, I need a private word with you about Angela," Kate said, sounding serious. I wondered what was up. It wasn't until after everything was over that Liz and I found out what had really happened. Kate had asked what Sparks was planning to do with her ex. Sparks had said, "Just get him to sign for $1 million and get him to pay some of our expenses." Kate's response was immediate. She burst into tears. "I don't want you to do that," she sobbed. Sparks took Kate in her arms, soothing her with words and gentle gestures until she calmed down. Then they sat on the bed, and Sparks began to explain why it wasn't an issue for her. It turned out that Sparks had been born to an alcoholic father and a narcotics-using mother. As she got older, Sparks realized that her parents had gotten their money to feed their habits through trade. They hadn't treated her badly until her 15th birthday. One day, Sparks had walked into the house after school to find her parents arguing with a man about rates. What she heard made her turn to leave the house. They were negotiating how much extra he would pay to include Sparks for his friends. It was a lot of money, and there was no way she would be able to talk them out of it. It was too late. Her father heard the door and rushed after her, dragging her back. From then on, she was treated with cruelty. Some men were more considerate, some were drunk, but the worst ones were sadistic. Kate started crying quietly. At 16, she got a job waitressing. She loved the people she worked with, and she was really good at it. Her tips were amazing, and she was popular with the other waiting staff, so it wasn't an issue most of the time. She could cover up the bruises from the more brutal men, but occasionally, she had to call in sick until the signs had faded. Most of the money she earned went to her parents. She was aware they were short on cash, but not how much. They had taken a loan that had to be repaid. One day, her parents brought her down to meet another man. He was dressed well, but she didn't like the look on his face. He was the source of the loan, and she was part of the payment. She had to go with him. His hand bit into her arm, and he shoved her into the car. When she whimpered, he clearly enjoyed it, so she did her best not to show her fear. His house was huge and expensively decorated, but she was dragged through it and down some stairs. What she saw down there terrified her. Among the chains and whips, there were devices she didn't understand. She soon found out what they were for. Her bedroom was a mattress on the floor, and he would come down at any time, day or night. Her body screamed to be left alone, and it felt like weeks or months before her tormentor brought some of his friends. She wasn't sure how many times she passed out. Tears were pouring down Kate's face as she looked at the empty expression on Sparks' face. Sparks wasn't sure how she ended up back at her parents', and it took a long time to recover enough to come downstairs. She couldn't understand why her parents were always staring at her face, and it wasn't until later that she realized they were waiting for her to look good enough to continue. They suggested an outing would be good for her and took her to a bar where a large group of soldiers were carousing. Sparks realized very quickly that she was being offered to them again for money, but she was still too weak to escape. She was terrified of being manhandled by a large group of men again, especially as she hadn't fully recovered. Then one of the soldiers offered her parents double if he could have her exclusively. Of course, they agreed. The soldier winked at her, took her hand, and said gently, "Come with me." Something about him made her think he was different from the rest. She was right, it was Bronx. He took her home to his mother, where she found a haven of peace and tranquility that allowed her to recover and regain some of her equanimity. Sparks loved Bronx, and of course, she thought of him as a role model. Sparks had missed so much school that she didn't have a chance to finish, so she ended up emulating Bronx and joining the military. She found that it suited her perfectly and flourished as an electronics expert. As luck would have it, Sparks ended up in Bronx's unit. They made it through some tough situations together and always watched each other's backs. When Bronx's time was up, he decided to set up his own PI business and asked Sparks to join him. Kate felt as if her emotions had been put through the ringer. She clung to Sparks and, in a rather watery voice, said, "If there's anything I can do to help, I really want to. I can't let you do this for me after all you've been through. Please stay here." Sparks was stunned that Kate still seemed to care for her after everything she had revealed. "You've already done so much for me. You've been so kind, letting me help with Angela. I've never wanted anyone to know what my parents named me, but you and Angela have somehow helped it fade. So, what is your name?" Kate suddenly realized that Sparks might not want to share it and rushed on. "Oh, I'm so sorry. You don't have to tell." Sparks smiled. It was the first time Kate had seen a genuine smile from her, other than with Angela. "It's Angela," she said. Kate's eyes widened. Oh God, it must have hurt so much with everyone saying it all the time. Sparks grinned. "Actually, no. I realized that people named Angela were cared for by their mothers, and Bronx's mother had cared for me too. So, it helped me." Kate smiled shyly at Sparks. "When you were caring for Angela, your face softened. You lost that hard look. You looked like an angel. So, can I call you Angel?" Tears started running down Sparks' face. "Oh God, what have I said? I'm so sorry, please." Sparks didn't have time to finish her sentence because Kate flung her arms around her and clung to her. "No, don't be sorry. You've never really had a friend, have you?" she said softly. "You are my angel." They laughed and hugged each other. It was the next afternoon when an email arrived at Clean Sweep Productions from the ex, expressing interest in the film. He actually had the nerve to request a meeting with the female leads. What Bronx wrote in reply shocked us all. Despite knowing the strategy, it was a politely worded "you can't afford us." He was right though. Within the hour, there was a reply insisting that the film was exactly in his area. He'd stretch his budget and requesting a meeting. "Got him easier than I thought." "Great work, everyone," Bronx said quietly, pleased. The next day, when they returned from the meeting, Sparks wasn't with them, and Kate looked worried. Estelle was bubbling with excitement and told us all about it. They completely fooled the ex, and Sparks had gone off to dinner to seal the deal. I had a quiet word with Bronx and asked him to talk a bit to Kate about what Sparks was doing and reassure her. Kate looked a lot happier afterward, and I savored my reward, a big, smacking kiss from Liz. We were all worried about Sparks despite Bronx's confidence, so we went to see if she was okay. She arrived back with a big smile on her face. "Job done, boss," she said to Bronx. "He's meeting me to go over the contract on Saturday. He thinks he's going to get what he wants," she smiled with a tight grin. Then, glancing over at Kate, she added, "Want me to make sure he knows he's being played?" Kate blushed, shaking her head. "You don't have to do anything to him. I'll take care of it." Her voice was hard, but the look she gave Kate was protective. The next morning when Liz and I came downstairs, there was no one else around. Sparks was on the sofa, sound asleep, with Angela sprawled on top of her. We left them to sleep as we made our way to the kitchen for coffee and breakfast. I was kissing Liz when we were rudely interrupted. "Get a room, you two," Estelle moaned. Bronx walked in behind her, putting his hands on her shoulders. "We could use mine, then we wouldn't have to see them," he grinned. Estelle stuck her tongue out at him. Why would I use your postage stamp when I can bathe in my own luxury? They both laughed. Can I help? Bronx teased. Now who needs a room? Liz pretended, giving a loud stage whisper. Who's for coffee? She asked, cutting through the joking. An overwhelming majority, as I expected, so I filled 4 mugs. Liz whipped the warm croissants out of the oven and added plates and butter. I love the way you two do things, Estelle sniffed appreciatively as we all sat around the table. Sparks came in, carrying a gently complaining Angela. I took her so Sparks could fix her milk, I said, passing her to Sparks. Kate looked exhausted. Angela was awake a lot in the night, so I brought her out to give Kate a chance at some uninterrupted sleep, Sparks explained. I'm hoping she'll stay asleep till Angela's second feed. Bronx commented, You've got a bit of a thing going with that baby. It's so nice to see you with her, he added. To everyone's surprise, the apparently unemotional Sparks' cheeks reddened. I handed Angela back to Sparks, who had her milk ready. I got up to pour Sparks a coffee, adding another plate in front of her. So, what's happening today? A cloud passed over Sparks' face. Sparks is going to meet the ex to get his signature, Bronx outlined. She's also going to spin him a story about the production. If he falls for it, we might get some immediate cash while he gets the $1 million together. Sparks and Estelle will have to keep working him until that's in our bank. I've also got a few things up my sleeve if the story doesn't work to get the extra cash. If that doesn't work, we'll dismantle everything and from his point of view, disappear. I think Ken had a few ideas about making the disappearance more final. I mentioned. Bronx looked up sharply. I realized that he thought final meant something darker. Bronx's shoulders relaxed, and he gave me a ghost of a smile. That would have to be done directly by clean sweep without mentioning any legal company, especially not Ken's, so there's no trace. We could also have his investment company sue the ex for their share, or at least threaten it, and then agree to drop the suit for a tidy sum, like a couple of $100,000. Here I was thinking it was you, that was the clever one, Liz joked. Who do you think taught him? Bronx grinned. Isn't he getting the hang of it? Later in the morning, Sparks came to find me. I've got to get ready. Angela is having her morning sleep, but could you listen out for her and get her if she wakes? She'll need to be fed before lunch, so you'll have to wake Kate. I expect she'll be awake anyway. Liz walked in. I nodded in Sparks' direction. Liz walked over to her and gave her a big hug. Sparks just grunted a sort of thank you and left abruptly. I was grinning like a Cheshire cat. Liz punched me on the arm. Poor girl. Cut her a bit of slack. I don't suppose anyone in her short life has ever called her honey or possibly even hugged her. Slight emotional overload. She's also fretting about going to see the ex, and Kate's worrying. I'm sure she's terrified that Kate won't be able to put up with her seeing the ex now. I remember why I love you so much, I said. Oh, emotional master. Liz laughed and gave me a hug. I returned it with interest. Kate did sleep until Angela needed her feed. I passed on Sparks' message and saw Kate's face fall as she realized she'd missed saying goodbye. Are you sure she'll be okay? Kate asked, clearly worried. I did my best to reassure her and told her that Liz had given her a big hug. By the end of the day, Kate was pacing nervously. Liz and I decided to stay up with her and try to distract her. It was obvious she wouldn't sleep a wink until Sparks was back. It turned into a long evening and then a long night. Sparks finally came in around 3, looking disheveled and tired. Kate rushed up to her and enveloped her in a hug. Sparks sagged into Kate, her body relaxing slightly. I couldn't sleep with him, Sparks' voice cracked. Oh God, what did he do to you? Kate asked, her concern evident. Sparks shook her head, trying to reassure Kate. It's okay, nothing happened. Just a lot of talking. He wasn't happy that things didn't go as planned, but it wasn't bad. Kate kissed her cheek, then went bright red, looking down, embarrassed. Are you okay? Liz asked gently. I'm fine, really. Thanks, Kate mumbled. The next morning, late morning, Bronx called a meeting to discuss the next steps. Sparks gave an update on where things stood, and it was agreed that Sparks and Estelle needed to close the deal together. Bronx would accompany them, since no businessman would sign a contract with only 2 unprepared people. I could see that Kate was relieved. The plan was for the 2 girls to go first to warm up the ex, then Bronx would arrive to finalize things. The idea was that the girls would get the extra cash secured before Bronx showed up, so the right timing was crucial. We agreed on a few prearranged text updates that would keep Bronx in the loop without disrupting the deal. Another period of tense waiting followed, until the girls finally returned just before midnight. Both looked a little disheveled, but all three of them, Estelle, Sparks, and Bronx, were smiling. Well, Liz was impatient. $200,000 in a signed contract? Liz asked. Bronx was brief. He's supposed to transfer the contract money by Wednesday, but he wants to see the start of filming first. That's how we got the extra $200,000, Sparks explained. It won't take much to set it up. We've already got about half what we need, and the rest we can hire. The only rush is getting a suitable location. I had a thought about that, I said. Wasn't there a bit about a boat in the script? Wouldn't that mean less equipment due to the cramped space? It had also explained the small crew. I'm pretty sure there's a higher place just down the coast. Good plan, Bronx agreed. Let's get on to it in the morning. We just need to be careful to leave no trace. Bronx went off first thing in his producer gear to hire the boat. Sparks took Ken, Liz, and me to get costumed up. We didn't want anyone recognizing any of us. It was going to be just the three original actors, with Ken, Liz, and me handling camera continuity, makeup, and sound. One of the advantages of the boat location was that Kate wouldn't be involved. It was too risky that the ex would recognize her voice. Kate had to stay behind to look after Angela. We had fun on the boat, setting everything up until Bronx got a call to say the ex was on the dock. We quickly went back to pick him up. I almost laughed when I saw he was dressed in full boating gear. He looked ridiculous. I could see Liz holding back a laugh, but Bronx was masterfully fawning over him. "Oh, you look so good," Bronx said. "How about we cut you into a scene? I think you'd look great with the two girls. How about a scene on the beach?" We all had to stifle our reactions. We could see the ex falling for Bronx's act, especially since we didn't actually have any bikinis for the girls. Bronx continued, "Oh wait, your formal look might clash with the girls' beach outfits. Let's go with a semi-formal look instead." He raised his voice, calling girls, "Let's get you in your costumes for scene 6. 5 minutes. His tone grated on the nerves but was perfect for his role. Liz, Ken, and I scrambled around looking busy, although everything was already set up. The ex didn't know that. Also, with him now part of the scene, much of it would be ad-libbed. Bronx, Liz, and Sparks had come up with a brilliant scene where the wife and lover confront each other, with the ex included. The husband would be there too. It was going to be interesting. When the scene was set, the ex and Estelle were on the deck, but there was no sign of Sparks. Bronx yelled, "Action!" and Sparks came barreling up the ladder, shouting at the ex. "You liar! How could you do this to me?" She screamed, giving him a hard slap across the face. I think he was surprised, just like the rest of us. But one thing was certain, his head must have been ringing. It wasn't a stage slap. Sparks had delivered it with all of her strength. His head jerked to the side, and there was a huge palm print on his cheek. Then Estelle joined in. "You didn't tell me you were married." Another slap hit the other side of his face. "If you don't get rid of her now, I'm leaving," Estelle said firmly. Her words weren't as forceful as Sparks, but still had an impact for someone untrained. The ex looked most upset. "No, don't leave." The ex turned toward Estelle, looking as if he actually meant it. "Why shouldn't she leave?" Sparks snapped. "If she doesn't leave, I will." The ex, confused, turned back to Sparks. I could see the others trying not to laugh at the situation. Estelle and Sparks exchanged looks, and then they joined hands. With a coordinated move, they each slapped one side of his face at once. Then they turned and disappeared into the cabin. "Cut!" yelled Bronx, walking up to the ex and pumping his hand. "Wow, that was really good. How about we film another scene with the two of them?" The ex, looking shell-shocked, replied, "I think I'll give it a miss and leave it to the professionals." "Fine, fine," Bronx said, turning to us. "Is that in the can? Or do we need another take? Could you take me back to the dock before you do another take?" The ex asked, looking defeated. "I think you'll need a professional for the role. I'm not cut out for it." After dropping him off, we couldn't stop laughing. "Sparks, Estelle, you were fantastic. What a shot. Hope he's nursing a headache for the rest of the day." "I hit him hard enough," Sparks grumbled. We packed up, took the boat and equipment back, and then went home to change out of our costumes. Then we had to get started on the bankruptcy letter and the letter suing the ex from the investment company. Ken had some examples from the office, so it wasn't too hard. The bankruptcy letter was to be sent out once the money had been deposited and cleared from the clean sweep account, and the suing letter would follow a day later. It seemed all we had to do was wait while we answered other clean sweep correspondences, turning down offers of staff and equipment. The junk mail was astonishing. Finally, at 4:30 p.m., the money arrived in the clean sweep account. There was then a series of transfers, making the money untraceable before it was deposited in an account at Ken's firm, where he would manage it for Kate. The bankruptcy letter went out, followed by a flurry of emails and phone calls from the ex-Ken had told us how they would be handled by the bankruptcy administrators, essentially claiming they had no information and were investigating, which would take months. The next day, the suing letter went out, followed by more emails and calls. This time, it was more enjoyable, as we all got to talk indignantly about being misled by the ex as a second investor. After 48 hours, we finally allowed the ex to speak with Ken. It was a masterful lesson in negotiation. Ken started with $1 million+ damages and, after some back and forth, managed to make the ex feel like he had gotten a good deal, settling for $250,000 rather than going to court, where he would have had no case. The money arrived in the investment company bank account the next day and followed the same convoluted route to Ken's firm. From there, he would distribute shares to all of us after paying any other expenses, though we didn't expect there to be any. The $200,000 the girls had secured from the ex had already covered everything. Bronx went on a scouting mission as himself, discovering that the ex's mansion was up for sale as a bank repossession. That told us we had been successful in getting Kate's money back and giving the ex a taste of the consequences he'd put her through. While Bronx was away, we started to clean up, confident that there was no trace of clean sweep or the investment company left. Bronx went in costume to cancel the mailbox, and the rest of the work had been done over the phone and by email. Clean sweep was no more. There was a lot of good news after the fun was over. Bronx relocated his business near Ken's firm, so Estelle could finish her training and qualify. Liz decided she wanted to be near her great-granddaughter and sold up to live with me. At first, I wanted a new house, but Liz persuaded me, quite rightly, that my first wife had been such a big part of my life, much like her first husband, that we should honor her memory rather than try to erase it by moving. "But you're moving?" I asked. "Yes, but not because I want to get rid of the house. I want to be near my granddaughter, who, after all, is also related to my first husband." Well, I knew I couldn't win an argument like that with Liz, so I caved. We worked together at the local shelter, occasionally opening our home to help others get a fresh start. But nothing could compare to the first person we took in and everything that followed. I often think of them, and of course I still support my friend's cafe for destitute mothers. It's that thought that brought so many wonderful people into my life, along with my precious Liz. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.